But I don't want to lose it before I lose my train of thought.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So where do you get that? And I'm not coming with an attitude. I'm literally trying to learn. Where do you get that Yahweh was Jesus? I guess not reincarnate. Somebody corrected me, but in spiritual form before it was mortal. So where is that at in the Bible? Because in my understanding, Jesus was not Yahweh reincarnate because he says that no one has ever seen the Father, yet Moses was seeing the Father. That's why he had the,
No, it's not an issue for Latter-day Saints.
It's not an issue for.
my bad.
Reconciled. It's
down there.
reconciled it's reconciled through the claim that Jesus is the God of Israel.
I'm just trying to understand, dude. I don't. Yeah, so
You're good.
I'm still confused though. The worship of Jesus Christ in the Mormon theology is conflated. I don't know why I keep using the word conflated. I'm trying to say related to Yahweh in the Old Testament, and to my understanding, it's Yahweh there was a lot of these prophecies that were fulfilled in Jesus Christ, being that Yahweh was incarnate in him. How does that sound?
So Yahweh is not. That's the problem. Yahweh is not a specific name.
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh is more of it's the divine designation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, it's the main God of the Old Testament.
It's for the God of Israel. But see, the Israelites don't really have a clear understanding throughout their texts as to the specifics of what this God really is. The only people to whom it's revealed itself is a few prophets. So
I like that.
They don't really have an understanding. Yeah, they're not really clearly articulating or understanding. It's just, it's kind of mystical to them. There's this God, and he's appeared to Moses.
Because everybody understands the Bible as God in the Bible being the God of the world, but really you're right, it is the God of Israel.
Yeah, so the way that the biblical texts seem to be representing this deity is, in the beginning of the text, it seems like there's a high God with a divine council, and he apportions the nations to several of the other gods. And that's identified in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. That this Elyon, or the high God, the God most high, that's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, he isn't called Yahweh or the Tetragrammaton when he's interacting in Genesis with Abraham. Then Moses comes along, and this God identifies himself as the I Am, or Yahweh. And this Yahweh God is actually, using, history. They believe he could have been borrowed from another pantheon of gods.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, the Israelites are basically saying we borrowed this God and made him our God. But either way, the biblical texts aren't really concerned with that, obviously, because they don't really mention that. But they're presenting this God as their God. So the God Yahweh becomes the God of Israel. He's designated Israel. Psalm 82, the reason it's important is under the Hezekiah and Josiah reforms, they are trying to centralize the religion of Israel, the cult of Israel, in the temple and in a specific priestly class. Because worship of Yahweh outside of the strictures of the kingdom and the temple in Israel is causing apostasy. So historians of the Bible, that's why they've kind of developed this source text theory of the Yahwist, the Elohist text, the priestly texts, etc. So they've got different sources for where they think these stories came from. And what's happening is the priestly source is one of the most prevalent. It's the largest source of material. And what they're doing is they are kind of streamlining the religion of Israel. And they're kind of trying to say, look, the God of Israel isn't just the God of Israel. He's the God of the whole world. But the remnants of the God of Israel being the God of Israel remains in the texts. Even though that's why a lot of Christians are kind of confused, because they think that God is the God of the whole earth. There are passages that seem to suggest that. But then there's also clear passages where he's just the God of Israel. And he's isolated to Israel. And a very, very good example of that is found in 2 Kings chapter 5, where Naaman, goes to the prophet Elisha and is seeking for a blessing from the God of Israel. So Naaman is a foreigner. He's from a foreign land. He comes into Israel. Elisha sends out his servant who tells Naaman to wash himself in the Jordan 7 times, and his leprosy will be healed. So he does. Well, as a consequence of doing that, Naaman takes the earth of Israel and he loads it into sacks and takes it back with him, because worship of the God of Israel can only take place in Israel. So in order for him to worship the God of Israel, he has to do it on the land of Israel, so he takes some of the soil back with him. That is kind of how people are viewing gods. Everybody has their own God. Another example is a few chapters preceding that, Elisha gives a prophecy that the Israelites they've teamed up with some other groups, are taking over the Moabites. And the Moabite king offers up his own son as a sacrifice, and as a consequence of doing that, the Israelites fail, and the prophecy of Elisha fails, because the Israelites are defeating the Moabites. And then after the king of the Moabites offers his son, it looks like the God of the Moabites, Chemosh, defeats the God of Israel, which is a disturbing thing to remain in the text. So if you're trying to scrub the text and eliminate any of these kinds of other gods, they didn't do a very good job doing it, because some of the evidence of it remains. Now, the Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9 passages look like they were amended, but we have since finding the Qumran texts in the 1940s, we've been able to reconstruct the original reading of Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, which is something that scholars had long guessed was that way, but that was affirmed when they found these fragmentary texts in the 1940s.
Dude, you have given like the most comprehensive explanation of the Bible ever.
So what happens is they've just consolidated power. So Psalm 82, what it reflects is it looks like, and again, all of this is just what scholars think. There's no certainty to any of this stuff.
Right.
But what they believe Psalm 82 reflects is basically the other gods of the other nations failed to basically execute their responsibility over their respective lands. And as a consequence of their failure, the high God throws them out of their domain and gives their lands to the God of Israel, who now is the God of the earth. And so as you enter into the New Testament period, the Israelites aren't just believing their God is the God of Israel. They think he's just the most powerful God in all of creation. He's the only God that exists. All the other gods have been thrown out. They've been evicted from their domains, and now the God of Israel rules and reigns over all nations.
And why did they get fired from their jobs?
Because of the Babylonian exile, effectively by allowing the Israelites to get taken captive into foreign lands, these gods didn't protect or secure. Basically, they were disrespecting their own jurisdictions, entering into the jurisdiction of Yahweh, and they were usurping his authority. Well, he gets his authority back. He gets his people back. And effectively, they view that as, well, the high God was angry, and so he throws them out. And that's kind of what Psalm 82 is meant to represent. At least that's how some scholars interpret it. Again, there's no certainty to a lot of this stuff. It's all just, I read it this way and I read it that way. But effectively, by the first century, the Israelites in their minds have consolidated their power. But here's the problem. They also believe that there is a remnant of this god Baal, because they believe he is a god who is still annoying the God of Israel, and he's been cast out, and he is now the authority over the other gods who've been cast out. And that's what a demon is. A daimon is a lower god who's been cast to this earth. So that's why they refer to Baal-zebul as the god or the prince of the gods, of the demons. So Baal-zebul, or Baal, becomes kind of this Satan figure. He's transitioned into just being a god that's constantly an adversary to the God of Israel, to now he is the adversary of the God of Israel. And then he is consolidated in later Christianity as the Satan figure. So that's kind of what it appears is happening. But again, Christians are kind of no, there's Jesus, and Jesus created an angel called Satan, and Satan fell, and that's how that worked. That's not really what the biblical texts reflect. And if your theology differs from the historical narrative, see, the thing is this historical narrative is so foreign to most Christians' dogma that they have a hard time accepting it. They're just like, look, that's completely...
They do not accept
Yeah,
it.
they're just like, that's complete nonsense. I've never heard that before. And the thing is, what's funny, and the reason that people like Bart Ehrman get irritated is they know that when pastors and other leaders of these Christian denominations go into biblical studies, this is what they're taught by their professors,
Right.
who are historians and linguists and scholars.
Wait, you're saying they're taught the correct way, or they're taught the...
Yeah, they're taught this. They're taught this historical perspective. Okay. They're saying, look,
it typically
we're not
breaks their faith.
Yeah, we're not teaching you. Well, and if it doesn't break their faith, what happens is or on the alternative, they go to like the Moody Bible School, which is an evangelical Bible college that will just reaffirm Christian dogma. It's not going to teach you any of this stuff very clearly. It's just not going to focus on it. You're going to sit into a class and it's going to be like, today we're going to learn about the hypostatic union and why it's biblical.
I think about it, right? It's like what I think about it. They don't actually like. That's what's up, man. Because you're like interpreting, like reading what's on the page, not in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so I've talked to quite a few pastors, and I am kind of, it's kind of disheartening actually, the amount of ignorance that they have about just very basic concepts that are just clearly articulated in the biblical texts.
Well, you think that they're doing it on purpose because there's an agenda with the societies of...
Well, no, I don't think that...
They don't know for the most part.
Yeah,
there are
I don't...
some
Well,
who do have a good context, but the rest, I would say, is probably just ignorance.
And I don't know that it's necessarily... I think that it's true. I think that Tristan's correct. I think that many of them just don't know. Because again, they go to a Bible school. So for example, I recently talked to a pastor about 6 months ago, and this pastor was getting a doctorate of divinity in church administration. Now, if you get a doctorate of divinity in church administration, what kind of teaching do you think you're getting at the college you're attending? Especially if you're like at Hillsdale Christian Bible School, right? What do you think you're going to get?
I wouldn't take any type of theology degree serious.
Yeah, and so what happens is that they learn some stuff. They learn the Bible. They can quote verses. And it's intimidating to have somebody who's really studied the Bible from whatever perspective they've studied it and is able to quote passages quickly. That's scary to a lot of people. Like, I don't know it that well. The problem with it is that they cherry pick. They're kind of taught to navigate the Bible, not necessarily to read and study it. And they certainly can't read it without... So, for example, this pastor, every time I talk to him, he's like, well, the Bible is a book. The Bible is univocal. The Bible is a story written by God. And I'm like, those are all just beliefs that you have. And I don't have any problem with you believing whatever you want. Right. But what I tried to do when I talked to him is I said, look, can we at least agree on just basic facts? For example, that the Bible is a collection of texts and not a singular volume? No. See, we can't even agree on that kind of stuff. It's like, let's just agree that Genesis, Exodus, that these are individual texts, that each text tells its own story, and that later traditional people took all these texts and compiled them together.
What y'all were talking about earlier about Paul writing a lot of the New Testaments, because I totally reject Paul's teachings, like in my understanding, and apparently he wrote a lot of the New Testament scriptures. Am I right? Or I don't know if that's actually correct. There's
27 books of the New Testament. He is probably the largest author of the New Testament, but only, So there are traditionally 14 books that are attributed to Paul by most conservative Christians, but that includes Hebrews. But Hebrews doesn't claim to be Pauline specifically. So then you're down to 13. And then there are 6 additional texts that scholars question.
I think the dogma comes from Paul's writings.
The what?
The dogma comes from Paul's writings.
Yeah, and so what you're left with is you're left with 7 letters of Paul that are considered the undisputed letters. Those are the ones that nearly every biblical scholar, I would probably say 99% of all biblical scholars agree that Paul was the author of at least 7 of the epistles. The other 6 of the 13 are disputed. And Hebrews, some people think that Paul wrote it. I have a friend who is a theologian and biblical scholar, and he believes that what Hebrews is a sermon that was delivered by Paul and recorded by the author of Luke. That's what he thinks it is. He says, I don't think Paul wrote it, but I think it's Paul's sermon and that the author of Luke.
Wasn't Luke Paul's boy?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is Luke appears to be a companion of Paul or associated with Paul. And he says that the Greek, my friend who can read the Greek, I can't, but he does, he says that he thinks the Greek of Hebrews matches the Greek of Acts and Luke. And so he believes that they have the same author. And then he thinks that the theology of Hebrews matches Paul's theology. So that's where he kind of gets those ideas. And it's more complicated than that, but
because he's an extremist, Paul is.
I don't know that I would label him that way.
Well, they wouldn't label that way back in the day, you know.
No, I don't think I would label him necessarily as an extremist. I think Jews would think that his ideas were relatively extreme because he is rejecting.
He did sentence people to get stoned to, unalived. That's in today's world. That's kind of extreme. I don't
know that I'm aware of Paul ever doing that. Paul, and
as a Pharisee, when he was a Pharisee, he sentenced.
No,
Christ
okay,
believers.
as a Pharisee, he wouldn't have sentenced anybody, but he was probably present when Stephen was.
And took part in it, the stoning of a Christian.
Yeah, as it looks like he probably did that according to Acts. Yeah, but again, see, here's the thing, Paul was a very conservative, very devoted Pharisee. He accepts that. Now, I think that what's really unique about Paul is Paul was a real believer. He actually was a God-fearing, very obedient, diligent, righteous Jew. And he viewed that this is a corrupting influence, and the law of Moses gives us full authority to root it out in very violent ways. And so I don't think that Paul can be faulted for his zeal against this new movement.
And I also understand that he could be like, after he was martyred, right? Jesus was martyred. I can also see how he's so extreme. Excuse me, using the word extreme. He's such a believer that he could see, oh man, I did fuck up. He was the Christ, and then turn. But then, he has no witnesses for his coming to Jesus moment.
Yeah, and I think that the evidence for Paul's conversion is the fact that it appears from, if you read Romans is basically Paul's attempt to convince a group of Christians that he is truly converted. And he's pretty verbose. He's pretty eloquent and articulate, and he writes a lot. That's why Romans is such a large letter. Because effectively he's trying to convince a group of Israelites who have converted to the way of Jesus and have all been baptized. He's trying to convince them that he's legit because they probably were pretty skeptical of him.
Him as a Pharisee, I'm sure. Well, I'm not sure. Actually, this is my biased opinion about this. I'm pretty sure he was used to spreading propaganda for the. So he was.
Of course, he wouldn't have used that. He wouldn't have used that word, but yes. Paul was incredibly zealous. He identifies himself as a Pharisee of Pharisees. Right? Yeah. And so, he was very, very zealous for the law. He was, he kind of identifies this. Which epistle is it? I think it's in Philippians. But yeah, in Philippians, he's basically kind of going off on how he is, I was very devoted. As aggressively as I was a Pharisee, I am even more so for Christ, is kind of his point. Yeah. But effectively, he identifies himself. Yeah, he identifies himself as pretty aggressive in that
It sounds like he was trying to aspire to be Moses, like Moses.
I don't know that. I think Paul presents as a relatively humble person as far as that's concerned, because it looks like he's pretty. I read his letters as pretty aggressive towards disobedience, but his letter to the Philippians, for example, is very. I mean, he's very happy with their behavior. He's not that letter. That letter is not written in condemnation. The Philippians letter is written because he's like, "Thank you,
there's a lot of authority.
Thank you for keeping the word. Thank you for not being idiots." I mean, that's kind of what his.
He feels like he feels like he has the ultimate. It sounds like he believes he has the ultimate authority. Like, who cares about his? You know what I mean? Like, he has such a high regard for his own praise.
Paul.
To send out a letter saying thank you for keeping the word.
No,
you know?
Paul views himself as a high authority over the church. Yeah, he doesn't mince words about that. He doesn't view himself as a subordinate authority. Yeah.
How could he? He was a Pharisee. You know, he would never, go.
Well, I mean, as a Christian, he views himself as an apostle, but he also views himself as the least of the apostles, the lesser of the apostles.
That's crazy, especially
because he thinks that he was. So again, being that he is very zealous now for Christ, he's probably a little bit jealous that the other apostles actually got to serve with him during his mortal ministry. So Paul's going to have, maybe some natural envy, but he's going to certainly be humbled by the fact that he wasn't there.
Well, here's the thing.
He initially made the mistake of persecuting Christians.
I can see how Paul could be a big idol for Mormons. I'm not trying to be an asshole or be rude, but I could see how that, because Joseph, the founder of the Mormons, was kind of like Paul. Like he wasn't a Pharisee, but he just had to come into Jesus' moment with nobody around.
There's a tremendous amount of overlap between Paul and Joseph Smith, at least as far as what they're claiming about their stories.
Are you Mormon?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a high regard for Paul?
I have a high regard for all the authors of the Bible. I just don't know who all of them were.
Right.
Paul's one of the authors. I can at least say Paul wrote this.
Thank you for being so cordial and not attack me because I didn't accept.
No, I'm not here to attack people unless they're assholes.
Yeah.
Like Tristan's a Jehovah's Witness. He and I would actually disagree on most things, but he's being very cordial. So,
well, anything's possible.
We can do so politely. Anyways, guys, it was nice talking to you, Mr. Wright. I've got to go to bed.
Thank you for your deliverance, dude. That was great. That was really great breakdown of the Bible.
You're welcome.